Hi there, it's Melody Brooke again. Today I'm going to talk about the difficulty of dealing with toxic people and toxic interactions. I know that, especially in the holidays, it's really tricky because everybody is stressed. Everybody has stuff they're trying to do and meetings they're trying to make and goals they're trying to make and gifts they're trying to purchase and trying to please everybody, trying to make all the events happen that they have scheduled. And it's in a very stressful time, and it can be a fun time, but it's also a stressful time. And when we're under stress, of course, that's when interactions can get pretty hairy sometimes, right? Okay, hold on. I'm going to post this on my personal wall so people can.
Hold on. I'm going to post
there
this
we go.
On my personal wall.
There we go.
Hold on. I'm going to post this on my personal wall.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, now I can turn that off. All right. So what do you do when you get stressed and you find yourself in a situation where things start to get toxic? And how do you, let's first of all talk about what is toxic. What do I mean by toxic? And what I mean by that is that when a communication or an interaction gets to the place where nothing productive is happening, basically, and I've talked about this a lot before, so any of you who've been watching my videos in the past or read my book understand that this is a model of your brain. We have this brain stem where our fight, flight, freeze, automatic reflex lives. It's sometimes called the lizard brain or the reptilian brain because it's the part of our brain that we have in common with reptiles. That old brain, whenever we feel a potential threat or possibility of maybe could be sort of a threat, this part of the brain fires off. And what it fires off is stress hormones. And those stress hormones send adrenaline and other toxic chemicals through our system, and it sends it into our mammalian brain, which is like the center part of our brain. It's called the mammalian brain because it's the emotional centers of the brain. It's what we have in common with dogs and cats and why we love them so much, because that's the emotional center of the brain. And then we have our new brain, which is around all of that. That is where our logical thought is, our problem-solving skills, our language skills, our ability to really connect with other people and know who we are in relationship to those other people and what our history is and what our biography is all in this part of our brain. So the old brain, basically, when it fires off those stress hormones and we're flooded with emotions, the new brain shuts down and we are stuck. We're stuck in this place where we're just reacting and we're not using our problem-solving skills or our language skills, and we're stuck in a very isolated place. And that isolated place is basically a place of egocentrism, because that part of the brain, its job is to completely guard, protect this organism that you are. Its job is to protect the organism. So it's not really concerned with anybody else. It's not concerned with your relationship, really. What it is it's designed to help you survive the moment in whatever form that looks like. Sorry, I have to have a drink here. And when that happens, we're stuck in a place where we feel like a victim, or we feel like a potential victim, and we feel overwhelmed, we feel trapped, we feel afraid, we feel despairing and hopeless. It's horrible feelings that nobody likes to feel. So in that moment, what we do is we flip into one of two ways of reacting. One is that we will flip into what I call rescue mode, which is where we please, placate, sweep under the rug everything, pretend everything's fine. We lie, we placate, we do whatever we can to try to get a sense of power and control again, because when we're in that victim place, we feel totally out of control. And so when we flip into that rescue mode, we become where we lie. We just do whatever we can to get through that situation, to keep a sense of power and control again by doing whatever we can to please that other person. The other alternative is for us to flip into self-protect mode. And in self-protect mode, we will try to get power and control again by raising our voice, by physically dominating, by sometimes it resorting to violence, or it can also be just like shutting down and going behind a wall. But self-protection allows us to feel in power and in control again by using force or shutting down behind the wall. All of those ways of reacting, the victim, the self-protector, and the rescuer, they're just a way of managing that sense of being out of control. It's based on the idea that we can get control of the situation, which the truth is there's nothing we can actually control. Now, we need that old brain if we're in a situation where there actually is a physical threat. So it's important that we still have that egocentric part of our brain to help us in a survival situation. But for the most part, in our lives, it's not required that we actually have that part of our brain engaged, because for the most part, our lives are not generally in danger that often, but yet our brain responds the same whether we are in danger or we're not. And so we have to learn to find another way, because that way of managing things just creates more chaos. It creates more pain. The more you shove things under the rug, the more resentment you have, the more anger that builds up, and eventually you will explode in a self-protective rant anyway. So the trick is to figure out a way out of that. And I remember when I was working with clients many years ago and drawing this out on a wall, and the guy says, well, so what is the opposite of that? And I said, well, the opposite of that, as it turns out, and it took me a while to sort of articulate what that is, but the opposite of being in that victim place is to learn to take ownership. And when you learn to take ownership, it can help you calm down those toxic environments. It can help you calm down a toxic interaction so that it doesn't end up harming you or anyone else emotionally or otherwise. It's a way of sort of doing an emotional regulation of the situation so that you can take ownership of the fact that perhaps there was something that you did that triggered a reaction in the other person, whether you intended it or not. It doesn't matter. You don't have to accept the blame for it, but you just accept and own that, yeah, there was something that happened just then that created a problem for this other person, and while it may not have been what you intended, it did happen. And so taking ownership of that, but not taking ownership of the other person's reaction, because you're not responsible for how they reacted to that. You're only responsible for your feelings and your reactions. You're not responsible for somebody else's. So this is a way for you to take ownership without blaming the other person for their reaction, because they're allowed to feel however they feel, because, you know, we feel what we feel. You're allowed to feel what you feel. But you're not responsible for what that other person feels. What's more, the other person isn't responsible for what you feel either. So it's kind of freeing, because it allows you to own only what belongs to you. And the opposite of moving into that rescue mode is to be respectful enough to speak your truth with no intent to harm or protect the other person. And the opposite of moving into that self-protect mode is to have some empathy for where the other person is coming from, and to have some empathy for where you're coming from. Sherry just left me a little message. I want to see what she said. She says, love this, no drama triangle. That's exactly right. And toxicity is when you get stuck into that drama, because that drama doesn't produce anything but toxicity. There's no way that those interactions are productive in any way. They just end up with you feeling in pain and the other person feeling in pain and distanced and disconnected. It's because it's egocentric. It's only focused on you and your survival. And each person ends up being thrown in their corner and fighting for their own survival. And there's no connection, no compassion, no empathy, no respect for each other, no sense of the value of that relationship. And it just disintegrates into more and more toxicity. It's like you end up not feeling like this person is your friend. You end up setting yourself up to not be a friend to that other person. So the question is, so how do you do that? How do you move from that toxic drama into something different? And the way that you do that is not as complicated as you might think. And, the funny thing is when people come in to see me, sometimes they're really shocked at how quickly they can turn those things around. And it just is, it's a shift in how you think about what's happening. And basically, you take ownership for what you're feeling, and you take ownership for the impact that you had without taking ownership or responsibility for what the other person is thinking and feeling, because you're not responsible for that. We all have our own way of interpreting reality. If you have 2 people, 3 people in the room, you're going to have if you have 10 people in the room, you're going to have 10 different points of view, 10 different ways of looking at whatever it is that's happening. And if one person thinks there's only one way of looking at it, well, then you're going to be set up to be in a toxic situation. So the first step is to be able to say to that person, if someone has done something that has flooded you with feelings, because when we're flooded with feelings like that, that's the old brain kicking into gear. We feel reactive. We might feel angry. We might feel hurt. We might feel ashamed. We might feel in pain in some way. And when we get flooded like that, it can be really overwhelming. And so the trick is to be able to notice when you're feeling those feelings. That's the very first thing. And not to do anything, to do your best to say nothing when you get flooded with those feelings. And oftentimes when you're around toxic people who operate in that drama triangle all the time, they will say and do things that will constantly trigger you into having those kinds of feelings. So the trick is to start off by being aware. Certain people are going to set you off. Certain kinds of people maybe set you off. And be aware of that, because that's about you. That really isn't about them. It's just who they are and how they are in the world. And your job is to have the boundaries to know what's you and what's them. So when you have a feeling come up, when you have that kind of reaction, you then take a moment, take a deep breath, relax. If you can, step away from the interaction. Take time to get your brain on something else, and then maybe come back. So it's one of the things you can do is if in the moment when you've got those feelings, going on with you, just say, "Whoa, I just noticed I'm having some feelings, and I just need to sort out what I'm feeling before I say anything, because I don't want to be out of line here, but I'm having some feelings. So just give me a minute to calm myself down." And I say, let them know, "Hey, I'll be right back. I just noticed I'm having some feelings." Now, if it's with a stranger, something happens. Sometimes we're out in public and things will happen. You just take a deep breath and just don't engage, because there's no point in engaging with somebody that's stuck in that situation. There was a time, I'll never forget this. I was holiday shopping, and I was pulling into Best Buy. And as I was pulling in, there was somebody pulling out of their parking space, and there weren't a lot of parking spaces, so I was really happy. It was right in the front, and I was waiting for them to pull out, and then another person on the other side pulls up and sees them pulling out, but can't see me because the car that's pulling out is blocking me, and they can't see me. But I was in a position to be able to go ahead and pull into the parking place. Well, the person who had been waiting on the other side was furious. Was so angry that I had pulled in, even though I had gotten there first and it was in my rights to pull in there. She didn't know that because she couldn't see me. Looking back, I don't know what else I could have done. I basically avoided her, because what happened was she chased me into the store, yelling at me, and that what kind of Christmas spirit is that? She can't believe I would just take her parking place, and just yelling at me, really literally following me around in the store, yelling at me. And what I chose to do was just completely not engage with her at all, which was probably the safest thing to do. But another possibility might have been to say to her, "Oh, wow, honey, I'm so sorry that it seemed like I had jumped into your parking place. I was already waiting before you pulled up, but I am sorry that it seemed like I had been inconsiderate of you, because that would not have been my intention." That might have been something I could do. In that moment, that was not what I chose to do, but that is an option, to be able to take ownership of the impact that you have and say, "Wow, I'm so sorry that you thought that's what was happening. I had actually been waiting for a while before you came, and I'm sorry that you didn't see me there, but I can see why that would upset you if you thought I was pushing my way in front of you. I'm not sure that would have done the trick for her, because she was obviously already really stressed. Because the truth is, when we're stressed like that, wow, it's so easy to get triggered by something, which is another thing to do that can help you avoid those toxic interactions, is to work on managing your own stress level by taking the time to settle yourself, by taking the time to work out, to get massages, to go for walks, to do meditation, do those things that settle you down. That's the best way to keep yourself out of these toxic situations, because if your stress level is already up here and something happens to annoy you, you're going to just be thrown way up to the ceiling. And if you're managing to keep your stress level at a lower place overall, if you're keeping yourself pretty much settled and calm, something happens, you might get a little more stressed by it, but you're not going to go over the top. So the challenge, especially through this Christmas season, is to find ways to keep yourself calm. The more you can settle yourself, the more you can keep yourself stressed less, then the less likely it is that you're going to get hooked into one of these situations. Because, things happen. I've been in stores where, I've been waiting to be served, and somebody gets served before me, even though I had been waiting longer. Where somebody takes the last item that I was standing there trying to get myself, or when I got the last item and somebody else was hoping to get it. And there's all kinds of opportunities for stressful, conflictual, toxic things to happen over the holidays. And that's just with strangers. And of course, we all know that where the real stress is in our interpersonal relationships, which is because the more important someone is to us, the more easily we're triggered into being stressed by them. People will say things like, well, I don't have this happen with other people. I just have it happen with my wife or my husband. And that's because that is the most important person to you. That's why that person is more likely to push your buttons than anybody else, because they matter more than anybody else. It's not that person's personality or communication style necessarily. It's that person matters more than other people. So naturally, you're going to be more triggery with them, because how they feel about you, what they think about you, how they interact with you is more important than it is with anybody else. So learning to manage that is a real challenge. What I tell my couples, and I think this applies not just to couples, but it applies to parents, it applies to friends, it applies to our children, is to be able to use this really wonderful magic phrase. And I will save you a couple of sessions in therapy by giving you the magic phrase, which is, I feel, because. And how you work that is, if you see something happening and you get flooded with those feelings, that old brain kicks into gear, because it's that old brain that floods our brain with all those feelings. You just own, hey, wow, I just noticed when you did this, when you said that, I had a lot of feelings just now. I noticed that I felt hurt or disappointed that you chose not to come to my house on Thanksgiving. Because you really matter to me, and I missed having you there. So being able to use that phrase, I feel because, remembering to use it when you're flooded is kind of tricky, I might add, because sometimes we just react so quickly. One of the things that you can do when you find yourself just reacting and snapping and saying something ugly or sharp to someone that you didn't really intend to say, is to stop yourself and say, well, hang on, I didn't really mean that. I'm just stressed. I'm sorry it came out wrong. Let me try that again. And then you come back with I feel because, so that you can do some relationship repair at that moment. So when you have people in your life, people in your family, people in your environment who are overly stressed, and they will say and do things that trigger those painful feelings, my suggestion is that you kind of try to slow things down and don't react automatically. Don't just snap right back. And if you do snap right back it up, apologize for it, and try again. If it's at all possible, take a time out. Actually take a few minutes away. Go away from the situation, settle yourself down, and then come back to that person, especially if it's somebody that matters to you. Clearly, if it's a stranger, it may not be worth it to you to do it. But if it's somebody that matters to you, come back to them and say, you know what, I just noticed earlier when, you had that tone in your voice, I just felt really hurt and confused because it sounded like you were upset, and I didn't know what it was that had upset you. So I'm really curious as to what happened that caused that reaction from you. So you slow things down and ask for more information. That can totally change the interaction. The other thing is that when somebody is perhaps triggered into a place where they're yelling or they're clearly angry, our instinct is to get angry back and just to yell right back. And of course that just ends up with both of you feeling like a victim, and you end up just going through this spiral of feeling like a victim, reacting as a self-protector, and the other person then feels like a victim and they react as a self-protector, and there's no end to it, right? So the trick is, the antidote for the self-protector reaction is to provide some empathy for that person. I'll never forget, I was young and I didn't have a clue about anything really, 22. And I remember my boyfriend, who was kind of an angry guy, we were having breakfast with a friend of mine. And when we went to sit at the booth, he was just kind of complaining and griping and, obviously on edge. And my reaction, because of my growing up history, was to feel intimidated and kind of shut down and flooded myself, in which I just kind of went into a freeze response. And my friend, who didn't react that way, just looked at him and said, "Wow, looks like you're having a rough day. What's going on?" And I was blown away by her reaction and how it settled him instantly into a place of being able to say, yeah, and explain how his day had gone and why he was feeling the way he was feeling. I was shocked at how quickly that turned things around. And it took me a few more years to understand exactly what had happened right then. And in retrospect, I can go, wow, this woman was really wise. She knew right away at a young age. She was about the same age I was, but she had obviously been raised differently than I had been. And she understood that reacting with empathy is the antidote to somebody who's reacting with a self-protective point of view. If you can come back to them with, wow, I can see you're upset. Because what I know for sure is that underneath anger is always hurt or fear. And if you can respond to the hurt, if you can respond to the fear and give some empathy, it shifts the whole interaction. Instead of trying to placate or please, which is something that, I'm a therapist, so clearly I have some rescuer tendencies. And instead of trying to please and placate and smooth things over, instead just say, wow, I can see that you're upset. Tell me more about that. I didn't realize that you were having such a hard day. And providing that empathy is so respectful of that other person. It's not minimizing what they're feeling. It's not brushing over what they're feeling. It's giving them empathy and respect and taking ownership for yourself, because you're not responsible for what they're feeling, but you can be empathetic for what they're feeling. A lot of times rescuers will struggle with that, because once they provide that empathy, then they feel like there's something they have to do about it. It's not your job to fix it. Just because somebody is having a feeling doesn't mean that it's your job to fix it. In fact, you can't fix it. Only that other person can manage their own feelings. Just like you're responsible for your own feelings, they're responsible for theirs. That's what ownership is. So to avoid a toxic situation, the most important thing to do is to stop and take the time to settle yourself and to not take the blame for whatever it is that just happened. to do your best to have really good boundaries about it, and not blame the other person either, because blame is really what sets that whole cycle in motion and sets you up for a toxic interaction. So if you're feeling shame, then you're feeling, that's, shame is basically self-blame. And if you're blaming somebody else, then they're naturally going to have a either self-protective or rescuing reaction to it. And if you're going into shame, you're going to naturally have either a self-protective or a rescuing reaction to that. So bottom line, slow down. You feel that swell of emotion, just settle yourself, take a deep breath, and notice what you're feeling. Check it out. And be aware that what you're feeling is your responsibility, not what the other person is feeling. So even if they're trying very hard to dump their stuff on you, for you just to be aware and separate out what's your stuff and what's their stuff, because your feelings are your feelings, their feelings are their feelings, and you, whatever you might have done that might have triggered that reaction in that other person, it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. In fact, I have this little sticker that I keep on my computer at home that says, just because someone feels hurt doesn't mean you've done something wrong. And so having that understanding can help you to separate out and have that compassion for somebody else. Because if you're in reaction, if you're in self-protect mode, if you're in rescue mode, you're not really able to be available to that other person. And they may be hurting, they may be afraid, they may need your compassion in that moment, but you're not able to provide it because you're in defense mode, you're in self-protect mode, you're in rescue mode, you're trying to fix the situation. You're not aware really of what that other person is going through. So slow things down, recognize and separate out what's yours, what's theirs. Don't take the blame. Don't send the blame. If somebody's been ugly, recognize that it's because their old brain is kicked into gear. They've been flooded with some feeling and they're reacting to it badly, and provide them a little bit of empathy for why they're reacting that way, and see the magic that can happen. And it will change not only the way the interaction goes, but it'll change how you feel. It will decrease your own stress level, because there's nothing as stressful as interacting negatively with somebody that you love, or a stranger for that matter, but particularly with people that matter to you. So slow things down, take a deep breath, don't own what doesn't belong to you, and be empathetic. And be respectful enough to speak your truth without any intent to harm nor protect. And that's going back to the when you, I feel because statement. Try to remember to use when you, I feel because when you feel that swell of flood of feelings. If you can't do it in that moment, just own what you're feeling. Wow, I notice I'm having some feelings, and I would like to tell you a little bit more about that when I understand it better. So just give me a minute to figure out what it is that I'm feeling, and I'll get back to you. So that's my Christmas gift for you today, and it would make a huge difference in your life if you could practice some of what I've just described. You can also learn more about me at melodybrooke.com. I am a counselor. I can provide individual and couple sessions, family sessions, both virtually and in person in my office in Carrollton, Texas. I also have a book. It's called Oh Wow, This Changes Everything, and a workbook that goes along with that called the Oh Wow Healing Guide. And then I have a workbook for couples called the Landmines to Gold Mines Couples Playbook. I'm also doing, every other month I'm going to be doing workshops for couples to give you an experience of the things that we're talking about. So check it out, and I will talk to you next Monday. Apparently I'm now stuck with this Monday time, so don't give up on me. I will be here every Monday about 4 o'clock, and I will see you then. Have a wonderful week. Talk to you later.